Well, it was about 3 years ago in Northern Ireland, and there was a village there, and a boy, lived in that village who absolutely loved Legos. He loved building things out of Legos. He had a lot of Lego sets, and whenever he had the chance, he asked his family if he could get a Lego present. Well, he had so many Legos. Finally, they just said, you got more than enough to build any Star Wars uh, spaceship or anything you ever need. But still, he always looked for more Legos. And one day, he was walking down in the little Irish village he lived in the northern part of Ireland, and he was walking down the street, and he looked down an alley. And the alley, about halfway down the alley, was a green door, and beside the door was a window. And he thought to himself, I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen that shop. I wonder what it is. And he walked down the alley and looked in the window, and it was all dusty and it seemed to be filled with all kinds of games. But it was dusty, and he thought, man, whoever owns this shop better clean it up. And he knocked on the door and pushed it open. And there was a room, the door opened into a room, and at the back of the room was a counter. And it wasn't a very big room. And there was a little old man behind the counter. And the little old man came forward and he said, hi, laddie. What can I do for you? And the boy said, do you have any Legos? And I've never seen your shop before. I just wondered whether you might have Legos. And the old man said, well, now, laddie, he said, I don't have any modern Lego sets. He said, but people have turned in Legos to me from time to time, and I've assembled a sack of about 100 Lego pieces of all sizes and shapes, and I don't know, nobody's ever wanted to buy it because it's kind of dirty and old and everything. He said, would you like to look at it? And the boy said, yeah. And he pulled out this old plastic sack with a tie around the top of it, and he opened it, and there were just dirty, dusty old Legos piled in it, maybe about 100 pieces or so. And the boy said, I don't have anything like this at all. I might be able to make something really cool out of it. He said, could I buy it from you? And the old man said, tell you what, sonny, he said, you can have it for free. He said, I've never had anybody come into the store who liked Legos the way you seem to, and who looked at this sack and was ever interested in it, and it's just sitting here gathering dust. And he said, you can take it if you can find some use. And the boy said, oh man, I don't know what I can make out of it, but I can make something really cool. And he thanked the old man and thanked him, took the sack and went out the door into the alley and back up to the main street. And when he got back to the street, he thought, that's the strangest thing I ever happened. I'm in this, the village wasn't very big at all. I walk all around this village helping shop for groceries and do stuff, and I've never seen that shop down that alley. And he turned to look back, and the door was gone, and the window was gone. And he walked back down the alley and he looked and there was nothing but a stone wall the side of a building. And he goes, whoa, how can that be? I just was inside that shop. Well, he was pretty excited about his Legos, so he went on home and went to his bedroom and spread all the Legos out on the floor and looking about this, that, and there were all kinds of different Legos, old ones. They were dirty and dusty, and he was sorting through it and trying to figure out how he might put something together that would be really pretty neat. Because he had some other things that he'd made that he treasured that were displayed in his room on bookcases and stuff that he really liked. And he was trying to figure out what he could make. And he noticed a strange piece of Lego. And the Lego was black, was pure black. And it had no bumps, no fittings, no nothing. It was, the size of a regular Lego piece, but it was black. And just a rectangle, a black rectangle Lego. And he looked at that and he thought, what the heck? What do you suppose that is? How could I fit that into something? And they spent the rest of the afternoon studying his Legos, and he set the black piece aside. He set it aside because he said, I don't know how I can fit that into anything, but, there might be something's going to come up to my imagination and I'll be able to fit it in. And so that night, he and his sister slept in the same room, younger sister, and that night he had to kind of, Dad told him to get the Legos off the floor. They're all over everywhere, and stack them next to your bed or put them next to your bed, and somebody's going to trip over those and break their neck. So he carefully piled up all the Legos. And he put the black one on edge. It was rectangular, so it was rectangular Lego. Put it on edge by the pile. And he and his sister went to sleep. He didn't know what time or when it was, but something that night woke him up. And he opened his eyes, and his eyes got really big, because standing by his bed was the Lego piece, only it wasn't the size of a Lego. It was the size of a doorway. It was as big as a door. And there were little gold lights all around the edge of it. And he's going, what the heck is this? What the heck is this? And he sat up in bed and looked at it, and all of a sudden, in the Lego doorway stood a man. And he had a big gray beard. He was pretty big. He had a gray beard that came down to his chest, and he had on a broad belt with a big sword in a scabbard hanging on the belt. And he had kind of leather boots up to his knees, and kind of a not exactly a tunic is the best thing that came down over his chest under the belt, but it came down to just about his knees, a tunic. It's like a covering, a one-piece covering. And he was staring right at the boy. And the boy sat up and swung his feet around to the edge of his bed and stared back. And then the man, very clearly, with one hand, pulled a hand towards himself, like, come here. And the boy's going, this is crazy. This is some kind of crazy dream. And he stood up and walked until he stood right at the edge of the doorway, and the man was on the other side of the doorway. And the man gestured again for him to come forward. And so the boy stepped through the Lego doorway. And immediately he looked behind him as he stepped through, and his bedroom was gone. And there was wind blowing. And it was foggy. And he was standing on rocks, gray rocks, kind of like a walkway leading off into the distance. And in the distance, he could see some flickering lights. And the man said, I need your help. Thank you for coming. And the boy said, what can I do? This is a dream. What's going on? And the man said, this isn't a dream. We need your help. Behind me is a castle. Up on up on the land above the ocean, up on a head wall. A head wall is a big pile of rock on top of which a castle can be built, and down at the bottom of the rock is the ocean, waves pounding against the cliffs. But this castle was built up on top of the cliffs. And the man said, you see the lights? We need to go to the castle, and I need your help. And the boy said, how can I help you? And the man said, I'll show you. And so they started walking along a stone walkway. It was like a stone bridge that crossed a deep cut in the rock that crossed it into the inside of a castle, a big, huge rock castle. And there, by the light, there was a moon, and there was clouds blowing across the face of the moon. But the moon was bright enough that the boy could see the castle, and there were big walls and towers and flags flying, and he turned to the man, and he noticed that as they were walking along, other men joined them, all armed with swords or battle axes and big beards, and they were big, strong men. And he said, what is this? And the man said, this is Dunluce Castle, son. This is Dunluce Castle. And out on the ocean is a serious, serious threat to our castle. And the boy said, what kind of threat? What? And the man said, Vikings. there's a fleet of Viking ships out in the ocean ready to attack, and there's nothing we can do about it. They outnumber us. They have many, many, many more soldiers than we do. Our protection is gone. And the boy said, protection? What kind of protection? What? And the man said, when you get to the castle, we'll explain it. We're protected by the Selkies, but the Selkies have been imprisoned and can't help us. And the boy said, Selkies? Selkies, what's Selkies? And when is this? And the man said, the year is 1250. And the Selkies have long protected Dunluce Castle from attack by the ocean. And the Selkies have been locked up, and they can't help us. And the boy's saying, Selkies. I remember hearing about Selkies. I remember talking about Selkies. And what are the Selkies? And the man said, water people. They're water people that have protected Dunluce Castle for centuries. And the boy said, well, what can I do? I'm just a kid. What can I do? What am I doing here? And the man said, you're small. All of us are too big. We can get you, if you can get in to the Selkie prison where the Selkies are locked up, you can save the castle and you can save all the people living in the castle. But there's not much time. And so after about 20, 25 minutes, a long walk, they crossed this stone bridge into the castle, and there were big walls and ramparts and towers, and even in the moonlight, the wind was blowing. Even in the moonlight, the boy could see flags flying off the towers of the castle. And so they walked through the castle to the edge of the castle wall, looking out over the ocean. And they looked down, and the boy looked down, and it was like 100 feet straight down this wall, this cliff wall that the castle was built on, 100 feet straight down to the ocean, and waves were smashing against the bottom of the cliffs, and and the boy said, well, what do we do now? The man said, you've got to jump into the ocean. And the boy's going, jump? That's 100 feet. There's nothing but rocks and waves crashing against the rocks. And the man said, I know. We'll time your jump so a wave is coming in and filling up the base of the cliff, filling up the base of the cliff at the bottom of the castle, way down. When the wave comes in and fills it up, you have to jump, and you will jump into the water. And the boy said, and what happens then? I'll be killed. And the man said, they'll be waiting for you. They'll be waiting for you. The boy said, this is crazy. You're crazy. All of you are crazy. And the men had gathered around him, and they were all looking down off the cliff. And into the ocean, which was big waves were rolling and crashing against the base of the cliff. And the men said, "You're our only hope. You're our only hope." And the boy said, "You're crazy. This is 2,000, this is 1,000 years before I'm living. This is 1,000 years before I'm living. This can't be real." And the men said, "You're the only one that can help us." And the boy said, "Well, it's a dream. It's a dream. There's nothing can happen to me in a dream. It's a dream. I guess I better do what I can to help you." And he said, what are they going to do? Who's going to help me down there? What's going to happen?" And the man said, "You'll see. The Selkies have taken care of this castle for hundreds and hundreds of years. And nobody can defeat the castle if the Selkies are free." The boy said, "Okay, it's scary, really scary. It's 100 feet down, and these waves are crashing. These big waves are crashing into the base of the cliff." And he said, "When do I go?" And the man said, "We're watching." And with that, he pushed the boy out into the air. And what the men had been watching was for an enormous wave to roll in and smash against the bottom of the cliff. And the boy fell and fell, and he screamed, but his scream was torn away in the wind. And when he hit the water, it was like jumping into ice cubes. It was really cold. And he felt this huge wave all around him, and then it sucked him out into the ocean. And as he was under the water, he felt something brush his body. And he reached out a hand in this water swirling all around him. He's saying, "This can't be real. This can't be real." And he reached out his hand and he felt fur. He felt fur. And then as he held out his hand, he grabbed a hold of the fur and held on. And he felt himself being pulled through the water, underwater. But he didn't need to take a breath. He was pulled along under the water, out into the ocean. And further and further away, the wave pulled back from the cliff. And the boy looked back, and he was quite a ways away, about 100, 200 yards away from the bottom of the cliff. And he looked up, and up above he could see the castle with the lights. And there was water in his eyes. He couldn't really make out the men all standing up there. But there was something warm on either side of him. And in the dark, he felt these two warm bodies on either side of him. And they were pressing against him and moving him through the water. And under the water. And he couldn't see much, but he could feel these two bodies on either side of him pulling him along, pressing against him, moving him along. And all of a sudden, they started to go down, deeper and deeper and deeper into the ocean. down at the base of these cliffs on which was the castle. And he, pretty soon, they stopped going deeper and they started moving sideways, pressing against him, holding him. And he kept thinking, I don't need to take a breath. I don't need to take a breath. This is a dream. This is the coolest thing that's ever happened to me. I don't have to breathe. And he was moved along, and then he felt like he was in an enclosed area underwater, and the bodies pressed against him, started moving upward and upward through the water. And all of a sudden, his head broke above the water. And he was in a cave, not exactly underwater. There was air, but it was a cave in the bottom of the cliff. And the two bodies moved him to the edge of the cave where the water came, and he could see there was some kind of light there, and he couldn't see it exactly, but on either side of him, looking at him, were two seals with whiskery noses, and they were looking at him. And he looked, and there was light in the cave, and the seals pushed him up, and there was sort of like a rocky, sandy little beach there. And the seals pushed him out of the water, onto the sand, pushed him. And he got on his hands and knees, and the seals kept pushing him, and he realized they wanted him to go straight ahead. And in front of him, in the light, he saw something shining. And he looked at it, and it was on the ground, and he looked at it, and it was a dagger, a knife. And the knife was, it was maybe 8 or 10 inches long, and it had a handle with a crosspiece at the handle, and it was silver. It was silver. And the seals kept nudging him. They had kind of moved their bodies up onto the gravelly beach. Is not exactly right, because he was in a cave underwater, under the ocean. So he was in a cave in the side of the cliff. And the seals kept pushing him forward, and they pushed him forward, and then one of them got its nose and pushed the silver dagger toward him with its nose. And he realized he was supposed to pick it up. And he picked up the silver dagger in his hand, and it began to get hot. Silver got hot. And then the 2 seals came around and pushed him. He was on his hands and knees and pushed him until he was standing upright. And he was facing a wall of rock, and there was some kind of light that were shining, was made that he could see. It was some kind of light, and he was facing a wall of rock, and he stood up, and directly in front of him was a hole in the rock. And somehow, he didn't know how, he looked at the seals, and he looked at the hole, and he looked at the dagger in his hand, and he looked at the seals, and the 2 seals, he could swear, nodded their heads. And he took the knife and put the blade fit perfectly into the hole in the rock. And he put the knife all the way in, the blade all the way into the handle. And nothing happened. And he looked at the seals, the 2 seals on either side. He looked at them. And both of them moved their heads from left to right, sort of in a circular pattern. And he took the knife and twisted it, and the blade twisted in the rock. And there was a loud click, a loud click, and a door opened in the rock, a big stone door opened in the rock and swung out toward him. And behind the door, sitting on a rock in a chamber, that is a room made out of stone in the cliff, was a beautiful girl with black hair, long black hair that went down all the way to her feet. And she was sitting there staring at him. And he stared at her, and she stared at him, and the 2 seals on either side of him waddled forward until they were on either side of her, and then she got off the rock and walked with the 2 seals past him to the edge of the water. And the 2 seals looked at him and nodded their heads, and he knew he was supposed to follow. And as she stepped into the water, more and more and more, her body changed. Her body changed, and she turned into a seal. And they waited, 3 of them, waited in the water for him, and he waded in, and 2 of them got on each side of him, and the seal that had been the girl led the way, and out they went through the water. Underwater. Out they went, and out they went. And when they came, they swam a long way, and he didn't need air. And the seals' bodies were on either side of him, bringing him along with the one seal in front. And they swam and swam and swam. He was just kind of pulled along by the pressure of the bodies. Swam and swam and swam along. And finally, they came up, and they were out in the ocean. And they came up, and there, behind them, on the cliffs, was the castle. And in front of them was a huge fleet of Viking ships ready to sail into the shore. And when he got up above water, his head above water, two of the seals kind of braced him up so he could stay above water, and he noticed hundreds of seals, all in the water. And in one movement, all the hundreds of seals dove down, except the two of them holding him up, dove down under the water and disappeared. And he watched, and the sun started to come up across the ocean. And the Viking ships were all lined up in a big, big, long line facing the shore. And there were men with swords and battle axes and big helmets, and they were all ready to sail in, when all of a sudden, the most amazing thing happened. The boats, the Viking boats, started going backwards. The wind was blowing in toward the castle, but the boats, all of them, there must have been about 40 Viking boats with the big square sails. They all started going backwards through the water. And the men, Viking boats, as you may know, Viking boats had a big sail, but they also had oars. And they rowed, the Vikings rowed the boats. And the men all jumped to the oars, and they started rowing as hard as they could in toward the shore. Didn't work. The harder they rowed, the more the boats disappeared off to the north, through the ocean, further and further and further away, until they were out of sight. And then the two seals who were holding him up above the water turned around and swam with him back toward the cliffs with the castle, Dunluce Castle, up on top. And they swam around the base of the cliffs, and it was daylight now, and they swam around to a little beach, just a little small beach. And coming down the side of the cliff to the beach was a stairwell. And the seals pushed him up on the beach. And were stairs, not a stairwell, just stairs cut into the rock. And the seals pushed him up onto the beach and then backed off and disappeared into the ocean. And so the boy climbed up the long stairs cut in the rock, climbed up, and up at the top were all the men, cheering and cheering. And the man who had brought him to the castle said, "Well, son, we better get you home." And so he walked back along this long stone bridge, back, and the sun was up and the castle flags were flying and everything was absolutely fantastic. And they got back to a place at the end of the bridge, and the man said, "You've got to go back. You've got to go back. Thank you so much for coming when I asked you." And there was a doorway, a black doorway, just in the air with gold lights around it. And the boy walked through the doorway. And the next thing he knew, he was waking up in his bed. And he stretched and he said, "Oh my gosh, that was the greatest dream I have ever had." He said, "I can't wait to tell Dad. That was such an incredible dream." And he looked down on the floor by his bed, and there was the little black Lego, right where he put it the night before. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and started to stand up, and his eyes got really big, because lying on the floor by the black Lego was a beautiful, long, silver dagger. And that is the end of the story.